Hello and welcome back. And that's right, I'm here in Shenzhen, China, after a short while after visiting the UGREEN headquarters. UGREEN are a brand I've been talking about a lot for the last year or so, ever since they sort of introduced themselves into the world of network attached storage. Again, I'm going to say the last year, but it's really been quite a few years. We'll get onto that later on. And I decided I wanted to see just what exactly was going on with their operation over here in China. Now, we have to get a few things out the way. Number one, I was not invited by UGREEN to come over here. They're not sponsoring this video. Not a single penny has been paid by them. It was just that me and Eddie have been talking about so many brands coming out of China that we decided, do you know what? We should know more. So we both decided, key word, we both decided to send me to the other side of the world for a week to visit as many brands as I could. And that's kind of the reason I'm here. We're finding out more about it. In fact, UGREEN sponsored a video not too long ago when we were talking about their NAS series after 1 year, and they sponsored that video. And ironically, this trip is costing us 3 times more than that sponsorship. So I'm not a businessman at all. Another thing, I had to sign an NDA. Not everything that I saw during the visit. I was there for about 4 or 5 hours. I can talk about. I'm going to allude to a lot of it, but there were just a couple of things that I can't talk about. Also, one particular bit of footage that I couldn't capture, I've had to rely on them giving it to me because it would have required 40 to 50 consent forms. We'll get to that later on as well. But ultimately, let's crack on. I've got my super special notebook here. These are all the notes that I was taking throughout. So straight away, their main headquarters isn't actually one building. It's located in the Chen Industrial Park, and that's in the Guangdong province. Again, I'm sure I'm going to get all the pronunciations wrong in this video. And it's kind of nestled in a larger estate. There's a few other brands there that I'm aware of. Ying, a Chinese SSD brand, and Xfanic, a USB kind of accessory brand that I've known of before. But it's not actually one building. Very quickly it became clear that it's actually a large section. It's 4 buildings. There's international marketing, standard marketing, there's a customer service and support area, and an R&D section. Although I went to the support building for a bit, that I'll talk about in a moment, I will say that the R&D center is where I spent the majority of my time. Now, in the reception area of the first building that I went into is their product showroom. Now, clearly, this wasn't really a Joe Public room so much as it was designed for sellers, resellers, distribution. Basically, it had one of every single UGREEN product located in there. There was also notably, and I didn't mention this during the tour, there were some notable gaps in the shelving where there was clearly a new product to go. The name card wasn't there, but there was definitely gaps for TB5 products, and definitely at least 2 new NAS products there that we'll touch on later on just a wee bit. But what was really interesting is they had some products that I'd not seen before. We've talked about UGREEN for the better part of a year, at least with regards to network attached storage. But of course, many are already aware that, since 2020, they've had a range of NAS solutions available only in China. And it was nice to see some of those, physically what they look like there in 2 and 4 bay form factors. There was some TB5 stuff there as well, Thunderbolt 5, but I didn't really look too much into that, largely because, we can barely find any client hardware with TB5 on it right now. So talking about Thunderbolt 5 stuff didn't really interest me too much for this trip, on a limited timescale. And it was a main group of 4 people that were showing me around the majority of the facility. 3 of them I'd already met before from previous trade shows that I'd interacted with. And there wasn't too much in terms of any question I couldn't ask. Now, a big question I had when coming over here was support, because network attached storage being a 24/7 paid solution, there are free open source options in the market, and I said as much to them. What is it about their brand that they're giving people in terms of support? And they took me through to that support and customer service area. Now, I saw around 40 to 50 members of staff in banks of desks and stuff. Then again, it was kind of evenly separated between support and a few areas, R&D and testing facilities, one in particular that I'll talk about in a moment. But the R&D section was around about, I could see 20 to 25 people. Because there was a little bit of overlap, I couldn't really say which one was which. And as much as I asked, it became very, very clear while walking through there that there was a lot of people in there and I couldn't really do any of the recording. So if you see any footage here on screen, that is the footage that they have supplied. I get it, notwithstanding privacy implications wherever you are in the world, these are people with faces and lives who perhaps don't consent to being on this video. I get it. But that was really only within that one building, very early doors, around about 12:30. I was there for about 4 to 5 hours total. It was around lunchtime, and you could see the flood of people nipping out to grab lunch. And there was we aren't talking 10, 15 people, we're talking 60, 70 people easily all going out there. And if that's the lunch break, that's not going to be the whole workforce there. So clearly there's a lot of people. And these weren't, these were working professionals. These were people dressed like they were coming in for a working professional company, and not really people that were working in like logistics and more in terms of their attire. I know that's a very vain observation, but I just think it's important to note just how much of that workforce seemed to be gearing towards research and development and of course support and customer services, something that's vital in a paid premium solution. And this brings me of course to product development. When I was speaking to a lot of their R&D guys there, they were talking about moving away from what they've already developed for their NAS platform here in China, and how much of that carried over to the westernized product, and moreover, how many of that bits and bobs were coming through. You okay? Hello. Hi. Now, while I was in the support sections there, I was brought into a meeting room to talk a lot more about the development of UGOS and some of the early difficulties they talked about having. Now, as mentioned, they have had a NAS product, a turnkey software, hardware-led solution here in China since around 2020, the original DX series that they had. And it was really just a question of, one, how much of that software development was available to be transferred over to the westernized UGOS product that a lot of us use and are familiar with there. Now, you could definitely tell that some of the things, again, this circles back to iSCSI, something we talked about, that a lot of Europeans, a lot of Americans, a lot of Brits that use their product desperately seek, because a lot of us use it in video editing, or we just want raw storage that we can point at, and that's something that Samba, SMB or Mac drives aren't really suitable for, and in some cases are completely incompatible with. Whereas over here they seem to be less of a problem. And that was why some elements of that software weren't as highly prioritized, iSCSI being a big one there. Now, again, they were sort of going through a lot of their roadmap. Of course, some of it I can't talk about there because it was part of the NDA, but some of the stuff they were talking about that they're now integrating into were either barriers that were formed by cultural differences and cultural gaps in their product development that they weren't really prepared for at launch, and some of them was simply a case of them prioritizing early doors the hardware, creating a stable hardware. This is their words, I'm just parroting it really. What they considered the priority of getting the hardware nailed down, and now they're going to spend the next 2 years fleshing the software out and making it as good as it can be. Now, that 2 years thing we'll circle back to later on, but things such as the integration of expansion, so utilizing their very own DAS boxes, because they do have a series of direct-attached storage boxes. Again, not a lot of them I've seen outside of China. They had a whole range of them there on display that are going to be utilized within the UGREEN NAS systems as expansion devices there. Their AI NAS stuff, I'm not going to bore you with that, I've talked about it in other videos. Thunderbolt and USB 4 direct connectivity there. Now that sounds like that's something they've now completely done in Windows, but they're having difficulty getting it completely working on Mac. That's why it still hasn't arrived yet, but it sounds like the Windows portion of affairs is done, but they don't want to roll it out until the Mac side of things is fleshed out and working stably as well. Again, their own words. There was a couple of other things. There was things like the integration of more languages, and now because they're integrating AI services, obviously that language job gets even larger, and there was a couple of other NDA bits, but that was really it. The key takeaway there was the idea that we're not going to see a refresh of the existing DXP series, which realistically was announced a year ago, but it's only been commercially available for about 6 months publicly, and even the crowdfunding has only been available for about 7.5 months. We're not going to see a refresh of those for at least 2 years when they start re-equipping it with new CPUs, re-equipping it with new hardware, and that's kind of okay as long as they're prepared to make those platforms as stable and as sturdy as possible. I don't really have a problem with that. We look at brands like Synology and QNAP and more, they release a product and then they refresh it 2 to 2.5 years later with newer CPUs, newer connections and more, and it seems like they're going to fall into that same model, and they're going to use these 2 years to truly polish their NAS software product, which to me is only a good thing. And this brought me on to what was probably my favourite part of the tour. Now, when I say favourite, I don't think it's going to be everyone's favourite, but if it is, you're very much my kind of people. And that was the NAS Lab. Now, if you've gone to trade shows, not just the big ones, your CES, your Computex, your NAB, if you go to most trade shows that NAS brands attend, big or small, they generally have a stand, they have a bunch of hardware laid out, and it's set up in certain ways to show off that solution doing a certain thing. Video editing, virtualization, backups. They have little preset, use case scenarios for you. But at their HQ here, much like that room that I went in that had all of the products all laid out, they had a room that was dedicated and laid out to so many different scenarios that would use their NAS in. And at first I thought this was just some room that they could show potential trades and resellers and more to utilize. But it became abundantly clear, and this comes back to Fred in the support team. Again, I'm really sorry I didn't catch your surname there. But he was sort of talking me through each of the case scenarios they had. They had one area that was a multimedia suite that had this kind of sofa and remote controls, and allowing them to basically show off not only what it could do, but then they could test scenarios, test the software in an organic, real environment, and find the pain points, find the areas where either it was inorganic or it wasn't really native to utilize, and then they could actually see the problem three-dimensionally. And then you could go to another area where it was an office suite, another area where it was a video editing suite. Each of these were tailored to see the solution, hardware and software, being deployed in a real-world case scenario, and then they could test it for real. And I loved that. As someone who has been following NAS for as many years as I have, knowing damn well how niche this subject is, it is so refreshing to see a level of detail and attention paid to this industry in terms of its testing that you see more commonly in laptops and phones. It's just nice to see there. So an example would be if you had your TV set up there and you had a couple of people around the home streaming media from the NAS at once. You could recreate that quite easily within that test area. They had the big screen, you could kind of simulate that if you wanted to. Moreover, say you had over here a NAS being utilized for, say, video editing, and over here it's still being used for multimedia as that single solution. The idea that you would be able to test each of those out within that environment in a real deployable scenario, something that you can do synthetic testing for performance very easily, but not a lot of test scenarios and test bed environments have this kind of setup for you to see things deployed within. It was just a really nice, refreshing change of scene to see NAS products shown in this fashion, right the way down to an enormous wall mural that obviously had their big logo, but it was made up of NAS components and PCBs and fans and real NAS components used within their products there. It just added not just a sense of authenticity, but moreover just generally a heart in that product there. Now, I know all of this sounds very wax lyrical. Again, as mentioned at the beginning, I'm not being paid to say any of this. They didn't even invite me. I came here and I asked to go to see them. Again, I worked in factories in the past. I worked in a health food factory. I worked in retail. I know what it's like when people are visiting. You see a shiny version of the reality. You see everyone being told to be on their best behavior, everyone being told to keep their desk tidy. I get it, but there is a limit to how much of that you can do. And I would argue, even if sometimes I definitely felt like I was being given the fluffy version of events, the fundamentals were still very impressive nonetheless. Again, that NAS test area, the showroom, I'm not that fussed around, but I just got a general sense of they are taking this very seriously, and this isn't a flash in the pan. And again, I bloody wish I could talk about some of the NDA stuff. I can't, but I will say that at the very least, they have definitely got a multi-year plan. And although they didn't outright say it, word for word, the indication was very clear, and via jigsaw identification, they want to see themselves as, if not the number one within 3 to 5 years, then definitely within the top 2 or top 3. Now, UGREEN are not the only brand that I'm visiting here in Shenzhen. Again, as mentioned, I've not been invited to anyone, I've just asked, and not everyone has agreed to see me. I will say UGREEN were one of the first to say yes, and they were one of the first to let me film in their offices. I'm not going to mention the others, I'll let those videos speak for themselves. But ultimately, before this trip, I was pretty confident in UGREEN NAS's product there, and although I didn't think on a software level it was on the same level as a Synology or a QNAP, I'm kind of confident that they're really going to hammer away at this product long term. So what I saw today, it's not going to make me say to you that you need to buy a UGREEN NAS right now, but if you do need to buy a solution in the very, very near future, then definitely put them onto your consideration list, because I have seen notable software upgrades in the last year, and everything I saw today, the stuff that I can and can't talk about, all indicate to me that it is only going to get better. And although they've still made some mistakes and they've still got a lot to learn, and I know erring with Kickstarter at the beginning certainly niggled a lot of users, and I really wish they hadn't have done that. I get the logic behind it. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Again, stay tuned for other videos like this very, very soon. Although I'm in Shenzhen now, chances are these videos are going to go out when I'm back in the UK, because they're going to take a while to edit, and I'm trying to pack it as much as I can. So as much as I'd like to agree if you put in the comments, go see X and X brand, chances are I'm already back in Blighty being surrounded by seagulls as you're watching this right now. But I'll probably come back here later in the year. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.